This experience happened to me in 2020. The world was shutting down because of COVID, and everyone was cooped up in their homes. Being an avid backpacker and camper, I used CO as an excuse to travel to different national parks and camp out in different places. One of those places was a creek in Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado. Without giving away my identity or revealing too much personal information, let's just say something happened with my job back in 2019 that caused my reputation to kind of suffer a bit, and a good number of people despised me. I had to change apartments, get a new phone number, and eventually quit my job. The mistake I made caused a good number of people to lose a lot of money, so the storm was expected. I just didn't know how far it would go. I was literally getting harassed by different random numbers for a while. Some texts were even threatening. I didn't know if they were from the same person or different people each time, but I considered the possibility that it was one person texting me from a bunch of different numbers. For a while, it seemed to stop, and I was grateful that people seemed to lose interest or just move on. I wasn't working around this time. I was taking time to myself, hence another reason I was traveling around to different national parks. I drove the 3 hours to Rocky Mountain National Park, parked my truck, and started my hike up the trail to the creek. There was nobody else there. I'm sure that was because this was right when the lockdown started, and people were taking it very seriously and not leaving their houses. That, and it was also still the winter time. There was a thin sheet of snow on the ground, hard enough that it made that loud crunching sound with every footstep. After a little while, I made it to the creek, and it wasn't frozen. It was still flowing. It was incredibly peaceful, and this was a detox I needed from the stresses of my life at the time. I found a place a little ways off the path to set up camp. After the tent was set up, I chopped up some wood, started a fire, and cooked some sausages on the stove. Then I started reading my book by the fire. After finishing a few chapters, it was getting dark out. Thank God for headlamps. I rolled a J and started smoking it. After a few hits, I felt my phone start going off. Honestly, apart from my family, I don't have a lot of people texting me, so I pulled out my phone from my jacket pocket and saw a bunch of texts from an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat when I realized it was happening again. The texts were from a number with a 203 area code, which I looked up to be Connecticut. Whoever it was texted me saying, "How's your camping going, buddy?" The second text said, "It's beautiful out here." The third text said, "I see why you came up here." My default reaction was to respond, "Who is this?" If they simply left it at, "How's the camping going?" I would have assumed it was a family member, but they were sending messages as if they were here with me. The weed had already entered my system, and I was definitely high. This did not help my anxiety one bit. I felt extremely paranoid and started looking around me, standing up and doing a complete 360, looking in every direction out to the increasingly darkening woods. I went to get my P365 handgun from my bag just to make me feel safer. Usually, I'd put a fire out before calling it a night, but as paranoid as I was feeling now, the thought of being in total darkness freaked me out. I went into the tent and crawled onto my sleeping bag. I stared at my phone at the texts, waiting for a response, which didn't come. Minutes dragged on, and I just wanted the weed to wear off. Honestly, I still had my headlamp on, so I tried to continue where I left off in my book. But between being high and my mind being stuck on those texts, I was kidding myself thinking I could read. I decided to just watch YouTube videos on my phone to pass the time. I didn't feel comfortable going to sleep just yet. I was watching some murder documentary on YouTube. I know, a pretty interesting choice considering the setting. And when I least expected it, I got another text, a response to my question before. They responded, "Doesn't matter anymore." My heart started racing all over again. I replied back, "How did you know I'm camping?" But once again, no response after this. The anxiety of this situation was weighing heavier and heavier on me. Was this a prank by a friend or family member? Or was this one of those people harassing me again? But if it was the latter, how would they know I'm camping? That's the really uncomfortable part. I managed to kill an hour just watching videos on my phone, and I noticed the glow from the fire outside was growing dimmer and dimmer as the fire died down to almost nothing. In the wintertime, without the sound of bugs, The woods are dead silent apart from wind on a windy night. The second the video would stop playing, the silence would become deafening. Usually, I'd embrace the peace, but my peace was completely disturbed because of these texts. Something then broke the silence. The unmistakable sound of human footsteps in the snow. They approached my tent until they were only maybe 6 feet from outside the tent. Then the footsteps stopped. I had the gun tightly gripped in my hand, ready to turn the safety off. There was suddenly a flash from outside. It looked like someone briefly shined a flashlight at the tent or they took a picture. I had my answer soon enough. I heard the person walk away. Now, before their footsteps slowly faded out to silence, and as I expected to happen in the back of my mind, my phone dinged and vibrated, and that number sent me a photo. The photo was of my tent. Following that was a text that said, "Have a good night's sleep." I can't explain it, but suddenly it felt like I completely snapped out of the remainder of my high, and a bout of adrenaline and confidence overwhelmed me. I unzipped the tent and shot 2 rounds into the air. The sound of footsteps running away in the snow in the not-so-far distance told me that it worked and scared the person off. But it also disturbed me even more. That would mean they were still hiding somewhere in the distance, watching. I screamed a threat into the air and climbed back inside my tent. I believe it worked because there were no more texts and no more sounds of footsteps. I was awake for hours after, simply because the occurrence completely woke me up. I felt like I drank 3 cups of coffee. Eventually, I did fall asleep, and waking up to morning sunlight was a huge relief. Whoever followed me there was not ready for me to pull a gun. I definitely don't seem the type of person that would own a gun. I know that. That was my first time shooting that gun since buying it, and in fact, my only time to this day. Whoever had been texting me, harassing me, and apparently stalking me apparently decided to back off when they found out I had a gun. Because almost 5 years later now, I haven't been bothered. Still, it was a nightmarish night, and I can't imagine how differently it might have turned out if I wasn't armed. Have you ever experienced something unexplainable? Share your story with us. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.